We were discussing last if the Torah, if it's considered a book or it's considered a Megillah, a scroll. And this is about how the Torah was recorded. Did they record every time something was said and Moshe wrote that down right away, or did they wait till the end and then, write everything all together? And we brought different proofs for the different opinions, because the Torah says Lakayach es Sefer Torah. It says take the book of the Torah. It sounds like the Torah is one book. And then we have a pasuk in Tehillim that David HaMelech refers to the Torah as a scroll. Megillah Sefer Kasav Alai. So now the question is, how does each one explain the other pasuk, the other opinion? So what is the one that calls it a Megillah? How are they going to explain that the Torah? If you say that it's a book, how would you explain that it's a Megillah? So we're holding where it says Inami L'Kid Reb Levi, or where it says on 125 alternatively, the last paragraph on the page. Alternatively, the verse can be explained based on a statement of Reb Levi.
Which verse are we talking about?
So the verse that calls the Torah Megillah, scroll. Yeah. Where Reb Levi said, 8 passages of the Torah were said to Moshe on the day the Mishkan was erected. And they are as follows. So even though these are 8 different parshas in the Torah the way we have it, but they were all said on the day that the Mishkan was erected, which was on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, getting close to that. So what are the 8 passages? The passages of the laws pertaining to Kohanim, which is in Vayikra. The passage of the introduction of the Leviim. The passage of those who are Tameh. The passage of sending out those who are Tameh from sanctified camps. And the passage that begins, and it was after the death of Aaron's 2 sons, which we know also happened on the 1st of Nisan, when the Shekhinah came down, and the 2 sons of Aaron went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So that was also said on the 1st of Nisan. And then, page 126, the passage prohibiting Kohanim who have drunk wine from entering the Mishkan or performing the Avodah while intoxicated, which is also in Parshas Acharei Mos, which is later, but it was also said on the same day. The passage of the menorah lights, which is also in Bamidbar, and the passage of the Para Aduma, which this week's Parsha is Parshas Para. We read in the Torah about the Para Aduma, the red heifer, the red cow, and that was also said on the 1st of Nisan when the Mishkan... That's the Maftir, yeah. So we have here 8 things, which in the Torah, the way we have it, are all scattered around in different places, but they were all said on the same day. So that was a lot of Torah that was given on Rosh Chodesh Nisan.
But the important part is it's out of sequence.
Yes. So that's the answer. Why is it called a Megillah? Because these 8 portions are really, different parts put together. That's why we could call the whole Torah a Megillah, because of these 8 portions. Because these 8 portions are more like a Megillah.
He's just basing that on that we needed to know all these things in order to go forward, right?
That's why all of these 8 things were relevant on the 1st of Nisan when they set up the Mishkan. So that's what it's going to say here. Yeah, exactly. These passages were all recorded that day because they were needed for immediate study. Since they appear in different parts of the Torah, they were recorded on separate scrolls, and when the remainder of the Torah was written, the gaps between these 8 passages were written as separate scrolls. Therefore, all the Torah segments are referred to as scrolls because of these 8 portions, which are not in order the way they were said, so that's why the whole Torah is called scrolls. So really there's a whole explanation for each one of these 8. Why were they so relevant? It's pretty easy to understand. Most of them, the Kohanim and the Leviim, they need to know what to do. The people that are impure, that they're not allowed to be in the Mishkan, once you have a place where the Shekhinah officially is, so then you need to know who to send out. Not everyone could be in every place. Now there's a Mishkan, only people that are pure are allowed into there. And then the parsha of people drinking wine, because of the story of Nadav and Avihu, so that happened also on that same day. And then how to light the menorah, you had to know how to light the menorah because the Mishkan was set up. And also the Para Aduma. Why is it necessary to explain about the Para Aduma on that day? So we look on the bottom at footnote 15. This passage at the beginning of Parshas Chukas describes the procedure for preparing the ashes of Para Aduma, through which those who became tamei from a corpse can be purified. Talmud Yerushalmi relates that the first Para Aduma was prepared the day after the Mishkan was erected. So it was actually the second day of Nisan when they brought the first Para Aduma to enable the purification of the Jewish people in preparation for the upcoming Karban Pesach. So that same year, the Jewish people are bringing the Karban Pesach, and you first have to be pure in order to bring the Karban Pesach. So that's why on the second day they became pure. That's also why we read Parshas Para before HaChodesh, because before we read about Pesach, we first have to be pure. Since the procedure of preparing the Para Aduma calls for sprinkling the cow's blood towards the Mishkan's entrance, it could have not have been prepared earlier. It says when you sprinkle the blood, you have to be facing towards the Beis HaMikdash. It had to be directly lined up with the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So Hashem therefore taught Moshe this procedure on the day the Mishkan was erected, because now they have something that you could, focus their attention towards. Okay, so that was about the discussion about the Torah, if it's a Megillah or if it's a Sefer. Last time we connected it to Purim. Now it's going to go into the general concept of the written Torah and the oral Torah. What is there more of? More of the written or more of the oral? It's interesting that there's something to argue or debate about it. What would you think there's more of, the written or the oral?
Well, there's 6 books of Mishnah and 5 books of Torah. So.
That's already, yeah?
Right there.
Right there. But it's actually a machlokes. Let's see. The Torah is made up of 2 parts. One part written, which is called the Torah Shabiksav, the written Torah, and one part is the unwritten, Torah Shabapeh, the oral Torah. Part of the oral Torah can be derived from the written Torah based on the principles by which the written Torah can be expounded, while part of the oral Torah cannot be derived from the written Torah, and it's just transmitted as a halacha. It gets passed down from one generation. The Gemara discusses whether or not the majority of the Torah's laws can be derived from the written Torah. So are most of the things, could you find the source in the written Torah, or is it, just directly passed on from generation to generation? Rebbe Lazar said the laws of the Torah are mostly rooted in the written verse of the Torah, and only a minority of its laws are based solely on oral transmission. So you could pretty much find the basis for everything that the rabbi said in the Torah Shabiksav, in the written Torah. As a verse says, though I have written for him, Israel, for the Jewish people, the major parts of my Torah, they have been regarded as foreign. The words of the Torah, it says, Rubei echtav loy rubei Torasi. It means I wrote down most of my Torah, and still it's considered strange that we're not keeping them, which implies that most of the things are recorded, most things are written down. In its simple meaning, the verse reads, though I write for him the glories of my Torah, they are regarded as foreign. The word for rubei could mean rove, like a lot, or it could also mean like the great, like the glory of the Torah. So here we're explaining it to mean most, like a lot. The word rubei to mean a lot of the Torah. Most of the Torah is written. This reflects Hashem's complaint that although he said many prophetic admonitions to the Jewish people proclaiming the Torah's greatness, they did not heed the Torah. That's the simple meaning of the pasuk. However, Rabbi Lazar interprets the verse as describing how a large portion of the Torah is written. So that's his source, that most of it is in writing and has a source in the written Torah. But here we have a machlokes, we have an opposing view. But Rabbi Yochanan said, most of the Torah's laws are based on oral tradition, and only a minority of its laws are rooted in the verse. This is a very interesting opinion. He's saying that most of what we have of Torah Sheba'al Peh is not really based in the Chumash. Why? For the verse says, and he brings a pasuk for this, And he said, this is actually from last week's parsha in Kisisa. It says, "For on the basis of these words I have established a covenant with you." The words in the Torah are ki al pi hadvarim ha'ela, which means based on the mouth. Literally, the phrase al pi means by mouth, and thus alludes to the laws that are orally transmitted. If Hashem's covenant with Israel was established on the basis of the laws that are transmitted orally, it follows that these laws make up the bulk of the Torah.
Why are they arguing this? Couldn't they just count?
So, if you could just count, then they wouldn't be able to argue.
Exactly. I mean, they're twisting words to change the glory of what I've taught you to the majority of what I've taught you. And here he's twisting words to say
Al-pi.
Al-pi meaning in a literal sense instead of the more general sense. There's a word for it I can't remember. The idiomatic meaning.
Mm-hmm.
When they could just literally just say this one is we can find the derivation, and this we can't, so it must be a hope. Why don't they just do that?
So that's, yeah, what are they arguing about? So let's see, in footnote 18, it's going to discuss a little bit what's their machlekes, what's the argument over here. And the one that's more difficult to understand is Rabbi Yochanan, which says that most of the things of Torah Shebal Peh do not have a source in the Torah. Rabbi Yochanan's position, footnote 18, is difficult to understand, as it is clear that most of the Torah's laws do have scriptural basis, and only very few laws have no source in the written Torah. Yet we know that most of the Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah, has sources in the written Torah. So, after the brackets, possibly Rabbi Yochanan is for the opinion that the teachings, continues on 127, of the sages regarding the understanding of the Torah's laws that are not alluded to in the verses are also included in the category of laws that cannot be derived from the written Torah. And these, together with those that are halacha l'Moshe Sinai, do make up a majority of the laws.
So the opinion of the teachings of the sages regarding the understanding of the Torah laws are not included in the verses. Okay. But aren't the sages also usually coming back to Torah to find their basis for what they're saying?
Yeah, that's
We just read two.
Yeah, it's still hard to understand.
It's only your classes.
Oh, okay. So let's see, there's some more explanation here. Other commentators explain that Rabbi Yochanan agrees that the majority of laws of the Torah can be derived from the written Torah. The disagreement between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan revolves around what is considered part of the oral Torah. This is another way to understand it. What is Torah Shebal Peh? Rabbi Elazar is of the opinion that only those laws that have no scriptural basis are considered part of the oral Torah, while any law that can be derived from a verse is considered to be part of the written Torah. So this is a whole different way to look at it. He says because it has a base in the written Torah, it's actually considered part of the written. Accordingly, the majority of the laws are part of the written Torah. Rabbi Yochanan, on the other hand, holds that even those laws that can be derived from the written Torah are considered part of the oral Torah, and that the written Torah includes only that which is written explicitly in the Torah. So this explains a little bit more. They're actually arguing what is considered, what's the definition of the oral Torah. If it has a source in the written Torah, is that still oral? So that's the machlekes over here. What to categorize as the Torah Shebal Peh. According to this definition, the oral Torah clearly contains a majority of the Torah's laws. If we consider the things that are based on the Torah Shebiksav, Torah Shebal Peh, so then that would be the majority. So it's a little bit of both, right? It's oral, but it has a basis in the written Torah. So what would you consider that? Do you consider that Torah Shebiksav? Right, but what do you consider it, the written or the oral? So, but it's based on the written.
Yeah, it comes from the footnote.
Yes. So that's.
It's written.
You say it's written?
Oh, if that's what you're going to surmise from it.
Yeah. But I'm saying it's not so clearly. It's expounded. You have to, So that's the machlekes.
Semantic. For some people.
But it's really it's not just semantics. It's a big difference if it's considered. This is what Hashem put in writing, or this is Torah Shebal Peh is in a way what the rabbis explain. So does it have the status of the Torah Shebiksav, or is it considered Torah Shebal Peh?
It's what they remembered from it, right? Since wasn't it oral Torah because the Greeks put down reading Torah? They couldn't read Torah anymore?
That's why what happened?
There's oral Torah.
The oral Torah was given together with the written. When Hashem gave the Torah, He gave both of them. But some He transmitted in writing, and some He gave orally. That's the two ways that Hashem gave us the Torah.
Like the Ten Commandments?
So we can consider every Durabanan as an oral?
So that's the question. First of all, which Durabanan is considered oral? So the ones that don't have source in the Torah, so that for sure we would call oral. The question is, the ones that are based on the Psukim, do we consider that oral or not? That's
what about a case where the Psukim say, you'll do this as I have commanded you? There's one specific one that I can't remember which one it is, but it says that. So the thing that you're supposed to do is in the Torah, but all the instructions are clearly in the oral, because the written Torah says, I told you what to do. So do you count those as separate individual things, or do you tie them all back to the...
So that could be part of the machlekes here. That's what they're arguing about. But what's amazing is that the pasuk says that based on what does Hashem make a covenant with the Jewish people, according to this explanation, it's not on the written Torah. The covenant that Hashem has with the Jewish people is based on the oral Torah. Isn't that interesting?
It's in writing.
But it's
the covenant is in writing.
But it's interesting. Hashem says, according to this understanding of the pasuk, Hashem's covenant with the Jewish people is al-pi, based on the oral. Hashem is writing in the Torah that His covenant is not based on the written; it's based on the oral.
Especially if Moshe is writing it down out of sequence and after the fact. It goes to what we just learned.
That would make it. How does that connect?
Now make it oral.
Make it.
God dictates it orally. Obviously, the Asheros of Hebrews were given orally. Then they were written down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that means everything is oral.
But once it's written, then it becomes written.
Yeah,
the question is something that stays. Is it supposed to stay oral, or it's supposed to stay in writing? The oral Torah originally is not supposed to be written. It's supposed to stay oral. So the fact that certain parts of the Torah were given, to be written down, that means that that's part of the written Torah.
So we're just
even though it's
based on whether we were permitted to write it
yes,
down.
yes.
So what is the oral Torah relating to us if it's all written down anyway?
Well, we wrote it down after the exile, after the Babylonian exile. No, the Roman exile. It was only written down after the Roman exile. And there we knew we were breaking Torah law to do it, but we had to do it to preserve it.
Yeah, so that's... But how do we understand this? Why would the covenant with that Hashem has with the Jewish people be specifically on the oral more than the written? Why would Hashem's covenant be based on the Torah Shebal Peh more than the Torah Shebiksav, more than the written Torah? So, this might be connected to what we spoke about last time, that in Torah you have two parts. You have the idea that Hashem is giving to us, and then there's the way we connect to the Torah. There's the giver, and then there's the recipient. So, the fact that Hashem gave us the Torah doesn't mean that we're connecting to it. It just means that He's giving it to us. Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah, which is a lot of it is based on the rabbis', understanding of it, is the way we connect to the Torah. So Hashem is saying, my covenant with you is not based on what I'm telling you, because that still doesn't show in a covenant. A covenant has to have two sides. It's two things that are connecting. So when the Jewish people, express all this oral Torah, which is really infinite, when someone comes up with a true chiddush, a true idea on Torah, that becomes part of Torah Shebal Peh, it becomes part of the oral Torah. So that shows on our connection to Hashem the ability that we're able to continue adding to the Torah in a way.
So kind of the question is moot, because as time goes on, the oil is going to continue to grow.
So what?
Didn't they consider that?
Oh, you're saying, so how could you say that it's less than the...
Not only that, but how could they say there's an argument? Exactly.
So the other person will say that, it's still all based on the written. Whatever we're expounding on, it's supposed to have a source, unless you're making a new chiddush that never, but that you can't make up something that doesn't have a source altogether, because then that wouldn't be Torah, So that's the whole interesting idea of a chiddush Torah. You're coming up with a new idea, but it's based on, the sources. You can't,
Okay. So come Yemei Mashiach, many of the holidays will be gone, many of the obligations will be gone, and yet there will still be laws being written and propounded as to how Jews should behave. That's infinite.
That still could be, it's still based on the original, on the Torah Shabbat, on the written Torah.
I'm just saying, a whole bunch of that's going to be tossed out.
What's going to be tossed out?
Many of the holidays, for instance.
So then, well, what does that...
Now you have all these laws that are not going to be followed anymore. But there'll be new things like, if I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but after in Yemei Mashiach, some trade foods are not going to be treifim, they'll be kosher.
So each thing is a whole discussion in itself, because we know that the Torah doesn't change. So then the question is, how could certain things become kosher? Like it says, there's a medrash that says when Mashiach comes, pig will be kosher.
Exactly. So now you have a whole bunch of, you've got a law that says pigs are kosher.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe pigs will change, the medrash. Maybe pigs will change. Maybe it'll be test tube pigs, which Yo-Yo has already said you can't have, but we'll get to that later.
No,
Anyway.
but the things that like electricity, which certainly how we use it today, was not present at the time.
Yeah, but that's based on fire. They said, okay.
No,
let's
no,
just-
so
That's a
the
simple
point.
example.
That's my point.
That's a simple example.
The point is that things had to be extended, twisted, derived to match. So electricity isn't fire, but it's the laws of fire were extended and modified so that it could be applied to something that didn't exist at the time the law was written.
Okay. But now you have a pig that you can eat. They're not just going to say, knock yourself out. If you eat a pig as a parv, you eat a pig as inflation, et cetera, et cetera. So some of those definitely come from other.
So the thing is that, in order to say that a pig is kosher, they're not just going to be able to get up there and say, oh, pig is kosher. The rabbis will have to go back in the Torah and explain to us how they're able to say that psak, that ruling. That's why you have all these books of responsa and halacha. They're not just going to tell you, okay.
Mashiach was going to answer all these questions that we have.
So that's part of it. But how is Mashiach going to do it? He's also not just going to be making things up. He's going to have to show his sources. He's going to have to show where he got it from. Because we know that the Torah doesn't change, so then how all of a sudden are things changing?
So what direction does a Jew who is praying on Alpha Centauri, where does he face? You know what I'm saying? A Jew travels. It's year 14,645. Okay, there are Jews on a planet orbiting Alpha Centauri.
Okay.
That's 17 light years from here. Okay. Now, what direction does he face when he dies?
Wherever your son is.
Okay. What kind of halachos are there going to be when you're on a completely different planet, on a completely different sun, in a completely different part of the world? Some of these are going to be pure chiddushim. They will
But
not relate.
why would we be there?
Because Jews in space. Mel Brooks wrote an entire movie about it. I mean, if human life is going to is carrying on, and Judaism is forever, we promise that, we're going to come up with situations that have no corollary to what we have here on Earth.
That's what we agree.
Right? Yeah, exactly. But is every one of those going to be able to be tied back to? I'm just saying that you're comparing something that's finite with something that's infinite. We've had this discussion.
Yeah. Mashiach comes, it's a messianic age.
So, Speaking about questions on Mashiach, when in the time of Mashiach,
Kind of a hand wave,
this is actually a very interesting question. So we're not supposed to originally the Torah Shebal Peh is not supposed to be written. It's supposed to stay oral, right? Why was it written? Because people will forget, right? Now when Mashiach comes, let's assume that there's not going to be forgetfulness, right? Because the whole idea of forgetting is something which is connected to sin, and it's like a negative thing. When Mashiach comes, everyone's mind is going to be sharp. We're not going to be forgetting things. Are we going to be allowed to write things down when Mashiach comes?
So that will increase the oral Torah.
Yeah, maybe we will not be able to use books anymore.
Or need to. Need to.
But the question is, another question is, could you use a book that was written, in the time of Golus, in the time before Mashiach comes, if it was already written, and all you're going to be able to write new things that Mashiach is saying, are you going to be able to write that down or not? So that's another question. When
think about it a little bit, and it starts to stretch your mind.
Yeah, but it's a good thing. It's looking ahead. So we'll discuss that later. Okay, so let's go back to this. So now we have two psukim. One sounds like that most of the Torah is written, because it says, Echtav loy, I will write, Rubei Torasi, majority of the Torah. And then we have another pasuk which says, Al Pi, which is based on the mouth, based on the oral, which sounds like most of the Torah is oral. So now, how is each rabbi going to explain the other opinion? So on page 127, the Gemara challenges Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. Yeah, Rabbi Yochanan said that most of the Torah is oral. But according to the other one, Rabbi Yochanan too, is it not written, I have written for him the major parts of my Torah, which indicates the laws that are rooted in the written verse of the Torah make up the bulk of the Torah. How does Rabbi Yochanan, who hold that most of the Torah laws are based solely on oral transmission, explain that verse? The Gemara answer is that it depends. This is semantics. This is how you read it. That verse is to be understood as a question. It's not a fact. It's not saying, I have written most of the Torah. It's saying, have I written most of the Torah? Should I have written for him the major parts of my Torah? Are not they, even the parts that I have written, regarded as foreign? So that's, two ways of reading the same pasuk in opposite ways. One is saying, Hashem is saying, I wrote so much for you and you're not doing anything. Or Hashem is saying, should I continue writing? You're not even following what I have written. So that's a whole other way of explaining the pasuk. Now, what about the other rabbi? The Gemara now challenges Rabbi Elazar's view. What about Al Pi? The Torah says based on the oral, but according to the other one too, is it not written, for on the basis of these words I have established a covenant with you? If only a minority of the Torah's laws is based on oral transmission, why was the covenant established on the basis of those laws? Why is Hashem saying that my covenant with the Jewish people is based on the oral? The Gemara answers, that is because the orally transmitted laws are very difficult to learn. Saying that Torah Shebal Peh is actually very difficult. The covenant is based on the study requiring the most effort, even though that study covers the smaller portion of the Torah. It's a very interesting thing that our connection to Hashem is based on our effort that we put into. That connects to what David was saying last time about Purim and Pesach a little bit, no? That Pesach is something more that Hashem does. Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, and Purim is about, going through the nature, going through, the way the Jewish people accepted the Torah in the days of Purim. It says that it was another receiving of the Torah. When Hashem gave the Torah the first time, it was just, Hashem kind of forcing it on them. But in the days of Purim, that they had Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, so that's when, they really accepted it. Okay, so this was another machlekes over here. If most is written, most is oral. Darash Rabbi Yehuda bar Nachmani. Rabbi Yehuda bar Nachmani, the speaker for Reb Shimon ben Lakish. We mentioned before already that different rabbis had a translator or someone who would say it louder for them that people should be able to hear. The Meturgaman, yeah. So he has a problem. He is trying to explain a stira, a contradiction between two psukim. On one hand, it is written, write for yourself these words which indicate that Moshe should commit the Torah to writing. On the other hand, it is written later in the same verse, for on the basis al-pi, which we said again means the mouth, these words which indicates that Moshe should transmit the Torah orally. So how do we explain this? Is the Torah b'tzav or is it bal peh? So here comes a very big principle. How may this apparent contradiction be resolved? The verse teaches as follows. Those teachings that were given in writing, the written Torah, you are not permitted to transmit orally. Torah shebiksav, the written Torah, is not allowed to be said bal peh. Those teachings that were given orally, that is the oral Torah, are not permitted to transmit in writing. So this is, it goes both ways. It's, Torah shebiksav should not be said orally, and Torah shebal peh, should not be written. Now the question is, what's the reason for this? What's wrong, to say the written Torah orally or the other way around? What's the problem with that? So let's see, footnote 21. The written Torah conveys many teachings through the use of variant spellings and the like. These allusions cannot be preserved with oral transmission. There's so many, nuances in the Torah shebiksav. If it just said orally, you wouldn't be able to, focus on all these things that are hinted to in the written Torah. What's the problem with writing the oral? 22. Committing the oral Torah to writing would make the entire Torah accessible to non-Jews, who could then claim that they, rather than we, are the true Jewish people. It's interesting that they'll get a hold of our oral Torah and they'll say we're the real Jews. Yeah. Alternatively, the subtle concepts contained in the oral Torah must be conveyed orally so that they can be fully explained. When a profound thought is set down in writing, it is often difficult for a student to understand the writer's true intentions. There's certain things that you just can't give over in a book. You have to receive it from the teacher directly.
What's funny is we've had the opposite problem. The non-Jews who take over the Torah and try to use it against us or reject the oral law, try to take the written law literally and say, this is either stupid or this is our thing, or what have you.
Yeah.
And they can only do that in the absence of the oral.
That the way that they were able to, to do that is because they also studied the oral. That's they had to have seen it in writing. And the Talmud was said in writing only because it was in danger of being forgotten. So there's a lot of practical halacha which comes out of this Gemara, which is, let's say you know some of davening by heart. Or let's say you know some Tehillim by heart. Mm-hmm. It's part of the written Torah. A lot of davening is from, Tanakh, from the written Torah. What if you don't have a siddur with you? Or what if you want to close your eyes and say those words by heart? Are you allowed to do that? It sounds like in our Gemara, the things that are written, you're not allowed to say orally. So that might mean that, you can't say words of...
Why do you talk with our Torah? You quote pasuk all the time.
That's another question. Are you allowed to quote a pasuk, a full pasuk, from the Torah? If you're saying something from the oral, that's one thing, but could you repeat a full pasuk, based on this Gemara? So this is really a question brought in halacha. So we'll start this. It's a big topic, very interesting thing. Copies over here.
And then if you write it down, you gotta write it online.
Sorry, I don't think I made enough. Maybe you could share. Yeah. So,
I'll just listen.
okay. So this is brought in the Shulchan Aruch. He says like this. Nagu likros parshas hakarbanos, that it's a custom to read the karbanos. V'chein shar psukim k'gain zmiros v'shiros hayam, like the ones we say in Hallelujah, or or the Shira, like Az Yashir, or Kriya Shema. See, even Shema, could you say Shema Yisrael? That's a pasuk. Hakol Bal Peh. So he says here that the minhag, the custom is that people say it by heart, even these psukim. Now, even though we just established that you're not allowed to say something which is written orally, anything which people, are used to and acquainted with, they're very familiar with, mutter. It's a very interesting thing. If people are familiar with it, with these psukim, it's kind of on everyone's tongue, then this isser, this does not apply. But if it's a pasuk which not everyone knows, even though you are familiar with this pasuk, asr. That's one opinion. So this is a clear distinction. It depends how familiar people are with it. Some people say, Shetama minagu shaloi asru loimar dvarim shebeksav balpeh, ela she'omer k'dei lohitzi acher midei chivasom. Some people say that the whole reason that you're not allowed to say things that are written orally is only if you're trying to make other people fulfill their obligation. Which means, let's say you're reading the Torah to make other people yotze, or reading the Megillah, so then you wouldn't be able to do it orally. But if you're not trying to make someone else be yotze, then you're allowed to read it by heart. So that gives you a lot of heter. Basically, the only time you're not allowed to is if you're trying to read it to fulfill someone else's obligation. But each person by himself would be allowed. So that's two opinions. What? Yeah. So they're saying that you would be allowed to say it by heart. So he says we have here two different opinions, which are very far one from another. The first opinion is saying that you're only allowed to say things that you're familiar with. The second one is saying you're allowed to say everything, just not to be mitzi anyone else. So we make a little compromise. You should try to be careful according to the first opinion, which means only to say things that people are familiar with. If someone is being lenient according to the later opinion, you don't have to scream at him. You don't have to stop him. So that's kind of the compromise between them. But we established that things that most people know, you're allowed to say orally. So let's say davening or karbanos or certain things of tehillim that most people know, you're allowed to say it. You're allowed to say it orally. So here's more of explanation what's the difference? Why certain things have to be oral and why certain things have to be written. This explains the difference between Torah Shebal Peh and Torah Shebeksav. Kine Torah Shebal Peh ikra lahasig or lahavin adin v'halacha. Torah Shebal Peh is mainly about the understanding. Shem Omer halacha ve'enei mevin. If someone reads the oral Torah and does not understand, einei nachshav lo limud klal. It is not considered study. Studying the oral Torah has to be understood. If we're talking about comprehension and understanding, each one understands according to their level. Interesting word. It calls the oral Torah or Reshus Harabim. It's something which belongs to the public, which means everyone has a different understanding in the oral, because it's about understanding. However, Torah Shebeksav nikra lachmi lashon yachid. Torah Shebeksav is called my bread. Hashem refers it, but in the singular.
In what place?
And we say es karbani lachmi leishai.
Yeah, how does it say that?
Or I think it's actually a different pasuk. It says there's a pasuk that says lechu lachmu belachmi. This is an interesting pasuk. It says go and have their bread with my bread.
Where does it say that?
That's a good question. I can find it in a second. It says lechu lachmu belachmi. I'm gonna assume it's like a Mishlei or a Koheles, something like that. Let's see.
As long as you're doing it from memory.
Chulachmu Balachmi. It was right. It was a Mishlei. Mishlei test. So the pasuk says, "Go and have their bread with my bread." So what's their bread and what's my bread? So their bread is referring to the oral Torah. That's the plural. Lachmi, my bread, that's the Torah Shebiksav, that's the written. So what is Torah Shebiksav? This is explaining the difference between the oral and the written. Torah Shebiksav, hiat ksuva tmunas oisius. Torah Shebiksav is about the picture and the shape of the letters. Kifia tmuna keinu remizase l'mayla. Because each letter of the Aleph Beis represents something above. So that's why it's very important that it should be written in a certain way, because you need to have those letters. Aval hasoga seichel adam ein bahem klal. But that's not about understanding. Kim lamayla min haseichel. This is above understanding. Chakim v'loy b'chachma yediyah. Hashem is knowledgeable in a wisdom that we cannot understand. That's why it's called the written Torah, because it's not about understanding, it's about the writing. And therefore you do not need to understand it. If someone who does not understand anything that he's reading, but he's just reading the written Torah, he's doing a mitzvah. It's considered a study. These days we don't really have Amma Aretz, people that don't know anything. But in the olden times, there were certain people who just didn't know, but they would still make a bracha of the Torah. So what if someone gets called up to the Torah over here in Shul, and he doesn't know what he's reading, doesn't know what it's saying? It's not about that. He still makes a bracha. Why? Because this is the difference. Torah Shebiksav, it's more about the letters, it's more about the writing, even if you don't understand. But Torah Shebal Peh, it's all about the understanding. And here is where we understand the difference between why certain things are supposed to stay in writing and certain things are supposed to be transmitted orally. The written, you cannot say it orally. Why? Because the letters represent certain things and they're higher than understanding. So whatever you're going to try to do to it, it's not going to be what it is. Things that are oral, which means things that are understood, you cannot put into writing, ki heim hadas, because oral Torah is about understanding. V'haksiv hulamaylo mihadas. But the writing is above understanding. So that explains why certain things are supposed to stay in writing and certain things are supposed to stay oral, because the written is above understanding and the oral is all about understanding. Now there's a custom or a good minhag, when you walk in the street, a lot of times to say some Torah. We say v'lech t'chavaderech when you walk on the road. So what are you supposed to say? What Torah could you say while you're walking on the road? So this we'll see over here. That's why we say Mishnayos by heart. We don't make. There's some people that do like a whole thing for kids, a whole program to study Mishnayos by heart, but we don't do a thing to study Tanakh by heart. Right? Why not? Because we just learned. You're not supposed to say Tanakh by heart, so we don't encourage that. But Mishnayos is the oral, so that's why that's encouraged. So that's what we'll see over here on the bottom. V'hini Amar Razal Devarim Shebiksav Iyaterasha Lo'imran Balpeh Va'af Rambam Lo Heviyah. Now this is something very interesting. The Rambam, which is a book of halacha, you would think that he would mention this thing that you're not allowed to say something which is written orally. The Rambam does not bring it in his book, which is a whole discussion. Does he hold of this? Does he not hold of this? Is it lahalacha or not? Gam yesh oimrim she'einu iser elam maiti acher nechavasna amirasei. Either way, there's a whole discussion what the Rambam's opinion is. Go to the last two lines. Avol b'Shulchan Aruch Erechayim. If we check the Shulchan Aruch, Paisik she'asr leimer bal peh, in leisha davar shagar b'fi koil. The Shulchan Aruch rules that you're not allowed to say it by heart unless it is something which is familiar to everyone. V'lachein kshelemid bal peh dvarim shebetorah shebal peh. Therefore, if you are saying something of the oral Torah by heart, that's obviously what you're supposed to be doing. Ein b'zeh pikpuk l'chol hadei. So then there's no doubt about that, and that's certainly encouraged. So that's why, saying oral mishnayos by heart, that's something which is recommended. Okay. Now, and there's something interesting that on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol would read different parts of the Torah. And on Yom Kippur, it says he would read a certain section by heart, which is a problem with what we're saying over here. The Kohen Gadol is reading something by heart. How is he allowed to do that?
How do you reconcile the nature of a king having to be able to memorize stories?
The king has to memorize it?
He has to write it, not memorize it.
But he has to know it to write it.
Copy it.
Oh, is that it? You have to copy 2 Torahs? I thought it was from your heart.
No, he copies it from the one copy that they keep in the temple.
Oh,
Yeah. So maybe I'll summarize the idea over here, is that there's different types of Torah readings. We have, let's say, the Chumash, the Parsha that we read every week, and then there's on the different Yom Tovim, we read sections of the Torah which correspond to the sacrifices that they brought during those days. And yeah, so it's a very different type of reading. One is more of like the study of Torah. You're just studying Torah because that's the Parsha of the week. The other things is more of like us doing sacrifices, just we can't actually do it, so we read the Parsha about it. So then it's not so much about the study of Torah per se, it's more of the way we could relate to sacrifices through studying about it. So it's more like a type of korban. So this is actually what the Tosfos explains over there, that the Kohen Gadol reading that section on Yom Kippur was part of his service. He considers that not a Torah reading, but more of his service. It was part of his avodah. So that's why he was allowed to say it by heart. You're not allowed to read the Torah by heart if you're just doing it as the Torah, as a Torah study by itself. If you're doing it as part of a service or part of korbanos, then you are allowed to do it. So that would be the difference, between different Torah readings. Now, it's interesting, you mentioned about quoting a pasuk, right? Are you allowed to quote a pasuk? So it's just an interesting thing that in a lot of Farbrengens of the Rebbe, he would say psukim with a slight difference. And some people thought that he was making a mistake. But he was doing it on purpose because of this Gemara. He says that if you say the pasuk with a slight variation, then you're not going against this idea of saying a written pasuk orally. So if you do, and he actually put that in writing. He said, if you look at this, he says, "Le'arasai she'amarti al kol b'nei Yisrael." Like the Rebbe said a pasuk with adding the word kol, which did not say it in the pasuk. Someone like caught the Rebbe. He's like, look, it doesn't say that in the pasuk. He says, glatiker, it's more smooth in regarding to what it says, that the written things you're not allowed to say orally, especially when you're quoting the entire pasuk. So that is something that people are careful, even till this day, that maybe when you're saying, quoting the whole pasuk, to maybe say it a little bit different.
we all say Shema Yisrael.
So that is something that we're familiar with. We said that if it's a pasuk that everyone is familiar with, you're allowed to. But if you're quoting some obscure pasuk that not everybody knows,
That seems to run the danger of corrupting the original.
Yes, the
rabbi is very great. They might assume that he's correct and their copy of the Torah is wrong.
So yes, it's tricky a little bit, So that's why we have to have it in writing. If we would just rely on the rabbis talking, You might end up with a different Torah. Okay, there's much more to be discussed, and hopefully we'll continue next time.
Next week I might need a video.
A Zoom or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll be out Thursday. Definitely won't be out on the street Thursday.
Okay.
Where you work?
We could.
Surgery Tuesday.
Yeah, should be.
Very transplant?
Hernia. I got the urologist today too. Bend over, Mark, see was there.